Luis, you know what was odd about Lost Omens Shining Kingdoms?
What was that?
It was so much more familiar than I'm used to from the second edition Lost Omens line.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that was kind of the point.
What was why was now a good time to go back to these six regions? Anyway, these regions that have been like part of Pathfinder history since the beginning, and a lot of the early adventure paths and adventures were centered around this region.
Well, a couple of different things. One is a long-term goal that we've had that is now being revealed, which is, hey, we wanted to set up some of the pieces on the board for a greater event that is going to be happening in Pathfinder's future, which is a event we're calling the Hellfire Crisis. It involves Cheliax and Andrin kind of butting heads and pulling people in as a result, and transforming the inner sea as part of that. And we needed people to know what the heck an Andrin is before we decide to get into that, right? We had the Lost Omens World Guide when the edition released, and obviously if you've read that, you can get a good feel for that. But we want to dive into it and put a lot more out there so you know who the important players are, what the current machinations politically, socially, etc. are, the kind of calm before the storm, as it were. And Shining Kingdoms is the perfect opportunity for that. And since we're talking about Andrin, we might as well talk about the other five nations in the Meta region. So let's do that. We've also been to a lot of different places that, for fans of Pathfinder from the beginning, all the way back in the 3.5 first edition days, are places we haven't explored yet. But if you're someone who just started with second edition, we actually haven't really taken too much time to get you into the kind of familiar classical fantasy areas. We had the Lost Omens High Helm book, Dwarfs, very classical. But hey, let's give you an obvious touchstone with classical fantasy. In case you're just jumping in or just joined us with the remaster, we want to give you something. Tian Xia is incredible. We love it. We're very proud of it. But some people, it's hard for them to go from hey, this is a fantasy game, to there's all these things from different cultures and stuff that I don't know as well. It's hard for me to implement them in my game. I just want some elves and some dwarves. Okay, well, here you go. Here's your elf and dwarf area. And then later we hope that you can take your chocolate and your peanut butter and have fun with both of those. Right? But there is a touchstone that wasn't out there for people to really hold on to, that hey, this is a good opportunity. We're partway through the several years into the edition, definitely an opportunity for a kind of recentering, as it were.
One thing that I look forward to, like I probably won't personally experience this, but something that I can see happening is somebody that's new to Pathfinder as a setting, buying this book, reading through, the history of the regions, talking about it with the older players at their table or the players that have been playing for longer, and then finding out that they played in those adventures that are now
Yeah,
the backstory for these regions.
yeah, absolutely. It's one of the fun things we get to do is mine into these APs and other adventures and decide what is an important detail to bring forward, or how do we fully decide just how War for the Crown resolved, for example. And we try to keep a light touch with it, but just enough so people in the know will get to point at their book, say, "Hey, I did that," or "That was me." The reason this person has been dethroned is because of what I did, right? And be excited about it. And for those who aren't in the know, then it's just a little bit more history to know.
Now, a campaign book like this is usually good about seeding hooks and whatnot for
Mhm.
adventures for players to come in, or sorry, for GMs to come in, create their own adventures, or for Paizo to look to for future adventure paths. Um, Whereas, again, because these are such familiar regions, we've seen the hooks, we've hooked onto them, and a lot of them are resolved. So, how did you go about reinvigorating the hooks and the intrigue of these areas without undermining what's come before?
One of the things we did is we really shook up the entire setting just before this, right? Last year we had the War of Immortals product and event where Gorham died, and here's this God's reign, and it is changing so much. I was tasked with explaining what has happened to the setting in the wake of the God's reign, and I decided I'm going to give every nation, every region in the Inner Sea at least one new exciting plot hook that is just this new development that changes things, right? In addition to that, we also had the war shards, which are pieces of Gorham's armor scattered everywhere, and they're infused with as much magic or mythic power or whatever you need for a given story as necessary. So those have been scattered everywhere, and those are at the very least a new blanket. Hey, this is an exciting plot hook. Anyone can come kind of jump in and grab a war shard or say Gorham's death caused X, Y, or Z to happen. But from there, we then knew that we were doing this event and started having NPCs and the nations and the societies start shifting in such a way that like would start setting the table for these kind of things. So some people are working to build new alliances. Some people are deciding to maybe be a bit more selfish and try to use their particular government to incite war and things like that. But beyond that, there's just a lot of a place like Andrin, which had a lot of focus specifically in the region with what is that region with all the logging and stuff? Uh, Falcon's Hollow region. There are a lot of adventures centered around there. There's still so much of Andrin to explore. There's still so many sites. And then, of course, because it's our maps, we can just add new locations and say, hey, this is a thing that you didn't know existed. And we just get to now say, here's a fun thing. One of the things we also ran into looking back at the first edition maps of some of these locations, there are places on the map that were pinned and named and never described. So we had a chance to finally flesh those out and at least it might be a paragraph or two, but it's now a new plot hook that technically was never expanded on in the past and now has at least something you can hold on to and then work from there. And then, of course, we trust our freelancers to just kind of really have fun with coming up with new ideas. One of the things we have here is this faction of dwarves who use leftover adamantine to effectively make mechs, which is not a thing I requested in the outline at all. I had no idea this was going to come, and when a freelancer gives you something as wild and over the top as that, you kind of go with it and say, yeah, great, let's do that. That is not anything anyone expected, and it'll be something fun that people can latch onto for the future.
Do you feel like going through each nation and giving kind of an overview of where they, well, not so much that it spoils the book, but just something to entice somebody who might be a fan of that nation to check this out, even if they've got, every single book that's ever been out there about Taldor, Andoran, Duma, etc.
Sure. I'm
Okay.
happy to do that. Well, starting with Android, why not?
All right.
Well, the thing I mentioned earlier about using your government to kind of work towards war is a thing that's happening in Andrin. The Supreme Elect, effectively the president of Andrin, Andira Murasek, is trying to prevent people from, getting too hasty, get into a fight, getting with any neighbors or anything. But there's a lot of other consulates and other people in the government who are like, let's build up our military. Let's do something with that. We have these new war shards and we're producing guns with them. That'll be interesting. Let's go make use of them. So there's this country at odds with itself that wants to use this technology and build up their military, but their leader, the highest leadership is thinking this is a problem. I need to stop this. So there's kind of a powder keg now in that nation as what's going to happen. Is there going to be war? Spoilers, I've already told you earlier. Yes, there might be some more coming in addition to that. With let's see, what's next? Druma.
Well, sorry, before we move on
Yeah, yeah,
from
yeah.
Andoran, one of the things that I think a book like this is useful for is covering some of the basics that I didn't even realize weren't in the game yet. When I saw that the Eagle Knight archetype did not exist until now, I was flummoxed, we'll say.
Yes.
And it is I really enjoyed that archetype. It had a very like champion feel to it without the
Mhm.
religion or magic. And so it
Yeah.
just feels like if you want to be that like virtuous warrior for good, this was a really fun way to take your character.
Yeah, absolutely. They're one of the I guess I'll call it a flaw of the Lost Omens style of books that we've been doing compared to the campaign setting books and player companion books of first edition is we just have fewer at bats with getting out content, right? So if there wasn't an obvious like faction book or anything like that, something like the Eagle Knight takes a lot longer to get out into the world. I'm glad we have it now, but yeah, it is one of those things that it sometimes is surprising. We didn't have that yet, but that just yeah, it just didn't work out. Plans didn't land perfectly in place to make that happen.
All right, Druma, where capital is everything.
Duma, if you know anything about Duma, you probably know about the Callistocrats, the prophecies of Calistrate, this kind of quasi-religious order of effectively putting wealth on the pedestal of this is the most important thing you do is become rich, right? And you follow a particular lifestyle and work towards that. One of the greatest things that you can accomplish as a prophet of Calistrate is achieving all your goals and then effectively earning your own personalized afterlife. Instead of sending your soul off into the great beyond to be judged, you effectively lock your soul in to a hollow deck and you can make whatever afterlife you want and enjoy the best afterlife that you've ever wanted. And there are these mummies kind of sitting around that are these people who have succeeded at that. But now they're waking up and being kicked out of their, dreamlike afterlife, and they are upset. So there's a lot of potential with these new broken prophets of Calistrate that are undead who are mad and want to go back to sleep, but they can't, and figuring out what to do with them.
Now, general zeitgeist has changed in the 20 years since the campaign setting was first released. How do you approach a region like Druma, a purely capitalist region, with 2025, like through a 2025 lens, as opposed to a 2020, no, I guess a 2005 lens when the first campaign setting came out?
Well, the some of these ideas I think are still completely fine to keep as is, right? Capitalism, if you're not a fan of it, here now you have a chance to fight against it, right? You can push against it or you can try to change it, things like that. So keeping some of these adversarial or potentially less than exciting or less than perhaps even would consider morally or ethically uh, exciting locations and ideas and concepts around. Hey, sometimes heroes need things to fight. Right. We have made some changes on, how we depict slavery, how much we talk about it. That's one of those things we decided. Let's actually step back from that. We can say that it existed and it might still exist. We're just not going to tell you adventures and put it in the books that much. But for heroes who want to go fight slavers, great, please go do so. Heroes who want to go punch a capitalist zombie priest in the face, please go do that as well. Right. So we also still kind of need a merchant nation to help run the mercantile, all of the economy basically of the inner sea, as it were. So that's kind of why they get to stay around. And then, of course, John Compton would be very upset if we got rid of Druma, and so would Thurston Hillman. They are very big fans of the region. Um, so, but yeah, I think there is a delicate balance with some of these concepts and ideas that maybe are seen in less favorable lights nowadays, and maybe 10 years from now we'll decide, oh, actually we should have changed Ruma, but for now we think it's still in a safe spot to keep around. And of course, have our own little jabs at like, look, you did the capitalist thing and you're still not happy at the end of the day. Maybe there's something in that.
All right. I also want to call out one mechanic in the back because, of course, every section has the gazetteer and talks about the region, and then throws region specific or or options flavored to that region into the end of
Hmm.
the chapter. And there is the black jacket archetype, but specifically the belay that feat at fourth level, where if an ally critically fails a strike, you let them, as a reaction, attack again, or use the next time they attack this round, they use the same multi attack penalty. I just like that it's like it is a very Pathfinder 2e specific mechanic and oozes with flavor. I really enjoy the cleverness behind that mechanic, and I can see myself building a whole character just to qualify for that feat.
That's great. I love to hear that, just one piece of an archetype or a single mechanic like that is enough to inspire people to play characters. There's been a lot of positive reception with the archetypes in this book, and I'm very glad for it. In particular, we can thank Jason Keeley for the Black Jacket archetype. He decided, hey, Black Jackets are a big enough deal. We should include the archetype in, even though we hadn't originally outlined it to do so, and he wrote that up on the clock just to make sure we had that, 'cause he felt very strongly about it. So I guess it worked out to at the very least inspire you, Ryan, for an exciting character.
Nice.
Next up, region, the Five Kings Mountains. It's the land of the dwarves. There, this one was an interesting kind of challenge because we had already done the High Helm book a few years past, and High Helm is kind of the centerpiece of the region, and that book even included a gazetteer of the whole Five Kings Mountains region. But how do we do this without retreading all the same information? Well, it turns out the answer is sometimes you just repeat the same information, right? This town is still the same town it was 3 years ago. The original plot hook is still relevant, things like that. But you do advance the timeline, right? We get to advance the timeline. If you read High Helm, one of the things that was a major motivator for the people of High Helm is they had found this major cache of adamantine, and they wanted to create effectively a shield to protect the mountain that holds High Helm in case Tar-Baphon comes by or other major situations arise that need to keep people safe. And we're working on this program called Torag's Shield, and by the time this book has come out in setting, Torag's Shield is done. They have completed it. Uh, there's a whole picture of what the mountain looks like once it's fully encased in this adamantine. Very exciting. So now what is happening is we have this major mountain that can be defended by this ridiculous powerful shield, and the dwarves want to go out and offer their defense to people who might need it, right? They want to make allies and say, hey, if you need help, if someone comes by, so some lich were to come by and you needed somewhere to run away to, please come to us. We want to try to protect you, and thus proceed to create those mechs I mentioned earlier as a demonstration of how powerful this keepstone is that is defending the mountain. So in what feels to me kind of going against the traditional dwarven uh, archetypes and stereotypes that you see in fantasy, the dwarves are actually being very sociable and actually reaching out to people and trying to make a lot of friends, which is not typically what comes to mind for me with a dwarf. I imagine gruff, kind of um, more, yeah, they keep to themselves kind of thing. But there's that. And then, of course, if you know anything about the dragons that live among the Five Kings Mountains, there's also, sorry, every time I see this name, it's just the most dragon name, Daralathixel. I never know how to pronounce that, and I think I internally shake my fist at whomever decided to name him with so many. It's hard. Anyway, Daralathixel, he is now mythic. He is powerful. Uh, there is a powerful Cinder Dragon that might be rising up sometime soon, and that's always a fun thing to go fight.
Now, back when James Jacobs was the only creative director on Pathfinder, people would tease him that he hated dwarves, and he often had to clarify, no, he doesn't hate dwarves, but just nobody that works on the campaign setting has been championing dwarves. And it feels like since second edition, and in the Lost Omens line specifically, we've gotten a lot of really good dwarf content. So, are you the champion of dwarves now, Luis?
I love dwarves. I love halflings. So there you go. Those. I guess they're getting love because I say let's do more dwarf stuff. Dwarves are cool, right?
They just keep getting more interesting every time there's a dwarf specific section in a book. I really enjoy it.
Yeah. And we've also had a lot of interesting opportunities. Like the Dwarves of the Mongi Expanse had a great opportunity to go beyond the traditional dwarf that you've seen in the past, and that leads to a lot of interesting stuff as well. But yeah, I think I guess I'm the dwarf champion here.
You didn't even know it. I feel like I could just shout out something in every options section.
You set yourself up for this
I
now.
know. So I do enjoy. There's a lot of new companions in this book, and a lot of them are not just straightforward animals. And I think that some of the dwarf ones are probably the most interesting. Just I don't know. They're like rock lizards. All
Yeah.
right. I'm sorry. I did not outline any specific thing to shout out to here. So I'm just happy
That
that there's new animal companions that
yeah,
are very dwarf feeling.
the Tuatara is bringing Chardra's animal companion back from first edition, so that was a fun little connection to dwarves and the older parts of the game.
Yeah, and we got Shardra in some art. Actually, we get a couple of iconics make some returns in this book.
Yeah, the we like to bring back iconics here and there when it makes sense. Shardra is, I mean, still Wani's iconic shaman. That hasn't changed, but we've also considered her now the iconic Rivathun character, Rivathun being a major religion among dwarves. So she gets to show up here and there. And then, we always say these iconics have graduated, but that doesn't mean they can't come back to visit every once in a while. It's not like they've died or disappeared or anything like that. So sometimes the art makes sense, especially with archetypes that really line up with things like that. So like Elaine with the Cavalier, for example. So yeah, when it makes sense, we'd love to bring them back and even occasionally have them interact with the current 2E iconics too.
All right, we have not talked a whole lot about art, but the banner for Galt
Mhm.
really sets a tone of a tavern with mixed clientele of ghosts that have been beheaded and their heads are still not attached, although it seems like they could just have them float over their neck, but some of them choose not to.
Yep.
And regular clientele who do not seem particularly happy to be sharing the bar with these ghosts.
Yeah. It feels like it's more that they're rowdy ghosts more than the fact that they're
Oh, it's not
ghosts.
that the
Sure.
okay. They'll
The,
drink
the,
with a ghost as long as they keep to themselves at their own
yes, of
table.
course. These ghosts, you know, they've forgotten their manners, of course. Um, yeah,
They'd lose
Galt.
their head if it wasn't attached.
Galt is in an interesting situation. It's been in anarchy, rebellion for so long, and it got to the point where even internally we're like, it's stretched a bit thin in terms of the credibility of this being able to constantly be in rebellion for so long. So let's resolve that. We did Night of the Grey Death, which put an end to the main cause of this constant rebellion. And now we get to have a nation that is getting a chance to rebuild and move forward. But now there's all these other troubles. There are these spirits that are loose. Are they going to cause trouble to the living among the nation? Is there a chance to maybe reconcile it and keep the undead among the populace and work with them? The leader, as it were, of the nation, Camellia Dranok, is trying to reach out to Geb, and that's a nation that's also focused on undeath and see what she can do to maybe help her nation out. And then, of course, there are people who just think it was more fun, it's more exciting when things were just constant anarchy and chaos. Let's go back to that. We have the Broken Ghosts faction that was introduced very just briefly in Firebrands and got to expand here. So there's a lot of what is going to happen next with Galt that leads to a lot of potential for the future. And I don't think even I know what's going to happen next quite yet. So that is fun.
And then as far as options go, we've got new ghost feats. Ghost is,
Mhm.
of course, a playable ancestry now in second edition, so it makes a lot of sense to support that here. And actually, going back to the companions, the Grey Bladeling, you can just be supported by a pile of knives that
Yeah,
kind of walks around with you. That look, as much as I may have liked that rock lizard, this is the companion that I was really most excited about in the book.
especially when it comes time to prep your veggies for your next meal. He's real good help for that. Yeah,
So now you got me thinking about cleaning off every knife that has potentially gotten blood on it before you use it to chop vegetables, and that feels like an ordeal. Like picture bath time with a cat, but the
yeah.
cat is just knives.
Definitely. That sounds like an adventure in and of itself at that point. Yeah, we leaning into the ghost thing sounded really fun, and then Andrew White, who wrote this section, had a lot of particular fun with just like, well, if you're undead, it'd be fun to remove your head and then start throwing that around. Um, so yeah, there was also a chance to dabble into kind of mechanics from earlier in the edition that we still want to support here and there when it makes sense. So we got to work with the ghost archetype, and we have the artifact archetype. You tie yourself to a particular artifact and gain power from that. So just more opportunities. It's fun to just let these authors kind of run wild with things and get back. Hey, throw your head and use that to look around walls and stuff.
All right, next up we've got Konin. So this felt not just like the history of Konin as a nation, but the history of elves on Golarion.
Yeah, it is very strongly tied to the history of elves. Konin is a nation that is recently uh, dealing with a lot of shakeups. The most obvious being the death of Tree Razor. There was an AP earlier this year, and you had to deal with the nascent demon lord Tree Racer, who had claimed the southern portion of the nation, transformed it, corrupted it, and you finally put a stop to him. And then we immediately had to decide, are we going to mention that in this book because this happens just not 3 months ago, right, from when the
Right,
book
yeah,
came out.
it probably hadn't been published by the time this went to printer, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
But we knew obviously it was coming down the road, but do we implement the results of that AP into this? Luckily, the results of the AP aren't so dramatic that, a whole part of the uh, nation fell into the abyss or anything like that. But excuse me, the outer rifts, as we now refer to them. But yeah, that was a grand opportunity. There is now the leftovers of that fight, which is the corrupted wasteland, is still there. Just because you've killed the demon lord doesn't mean that he's his touch, his influence isn't still felt. And there's the potential to clean up things. There's also the Queen Talandria is getting married.
Oh,
Back in a book that you helped contribute to, Lost Omens Legends, we did a profile on her. We talked about how she had this uh, I think we use the term consort that she was interested in, and it was an important part of her life. And we decided let's advance the storyline. One of the things we get to do with 2E is just develop these events rather than keep them static like we tended to do in first edition. And now she's getting married, and that's a big deal, right, for the nation. The queen getting married is just kind of a fun thing. And then of course you just have the potential with a lot of excitement of the gates that are kind of dotted around the nation, that the elf gates that they normally used to travel around. Some of these are sending you to the wrong place now, or some of them are activating even though they've been non-functional for decades, if not centuries or even longer. So there's the potential of where is this going to send us? So there's a lot of elf stuff, but there's also still just kind of your classical adventuring opportunities out there as well.
sorry, I chuckled when you said something that I contributed to because I thought you were referencing Elven Entanglement, which takes place in Konin. And I was
Oh
like,
yeah.
you're giving me a lot of credit for that
I
was a
I
long time ago.
I based it all off of what that was that one scenario.
You were talking about the teleporting, and the School of Gates is the uncommon arcane school here, and um, it reminded me of in 1E there was a series of like the Nightcrawler from X-Men type of feats and spells
Yeah.
that were like open-ended enough that you could do multiple builds. And just I remember a lot of chats with like Alex and people figuring out what is the best Nightcrawler build. And I think we've got a much more direct path to the best Nightcrawler build
Yeah,
by way of second edition now.
for sure. The wizard schools are actually a really fun spot for design potential. There's a lot of the classical tropes, or basic ideas are covered with the player core book, and then from there we were able to start getting into stuff like this. I was excited to say, hey, elves, they have these gates. Would make sense that they'd understand teleportation magic. Let's see what a school of magic looks like. And then we also now have the opportunity for the future with this list of the school of gates. If we wanted to come up with some archetype that is focused on teleportation magic and say, hey, you are maybe not a wizard, but here's this archetype. And in addition to the normal spells you get, grab the spells from this gate list. And it makes it very easy for us to reference for the future. We've done that a couple of times where we make a school that technically is for wizards, but then we can also point at it in other ways to give those mechanics to other people.
And finally, Taldor.
Taldor. Taldor is in an interesting place. The new Grand Princess Utopia, after the events of War for the Crown is still trying to kind of make things work for herself, but there's always people working against her. Taldor is a nation where political, intrigue, classical courtly intrigue is most prevalent, and we've made sure not to pull back on that in any capacity. Not everyone loves what Utopia is doing, and there's always machinations, grand schemes going on in the background. It's more of the same, but in a positive way, I think. If you loved the courtly intrigue kind of thing that came with War for the Crown or just the nation as a whole, there's just as much potential, if not more, for that as it was in the past.
I very much did enjoy the political
Yeah.
machination that went with War for the Crown, and it was kind of fun revisiting Utopia, who was like I played through half of that adventure path, and she was obviously an important NPC to us, and so yeah, it was nice revisiting this part of Galarian history and seeing what the rest of that story arc was. All right, you included bestiary in the back. Is that just because monsters are fun?
Yeah, all of our region books, we want to include monsters that are local to the area. At the very least, if you're using this book to run your own campaigns, you may not want to run the Spore War AP, right? But you want to do some stuff in Keonan. We want to give you monsters that fit the region and encourage you to use those. And then also for ourselves, we love to have the stat blocks ready to go so then we can pop them into adventures in the future. I always ask the narrative side of the team to say, hey, are there any monsters from first edition that you wish were back that fit the region? So we can get them ready to go for them for future adventures. And sometimes we just put in what we think is fun. For example, the Shroud Wing, it's really gross vulture thing. I just asked, give me a level 4 creature that is focused on that is just like a beast or an animal. Figure something out, and then the author pitched me a couple of ideas, and I like this, so we got to include that. So it's always fun to include monsters and give GMs just a few more tools for their toolbox.
So the one that stood out to me was the lamp blighter that will
Yeah,
put out your
which
torch, then pluck out your eyes.
which Esther wrote.
Oh, Esther. Okay, excellent. Well,
Yeah.
I'll compliment her when we talk to her about it.
Yeah, that was a 1E monster that got translated over, and she did a great job with that. One of the challenges with grabbing stuff from 1E is deciding how much of the mechanics from 1E do we need to keep before we translate it, as we translate it over, to still keep that monster being what it is. But I think she did a great job with that. And it's just a real mean-spirited thing, much in the vein of Tooth Fairy stuff that I think works great.
It's the eye fairy.
Yeah.
But it also like it feels like you put out the torch. It's like, well, I've got dark vision. Yeah, for now.
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally, most monsters have at least a very small puzzle within them that you can solve. And this one is, hey, how do we deal with one, the darkness, and then later, after everything is said and done, getting this eye back to where it needs to be.
Well, Luis, by coincidence, after taking a break from second edition, this is the book I came back to, and what a just a warm hug to come back to
Great.
Pathfinder second edition. Like I said, it was so familiar, and that was not a critique. It just because I'm so used to the Lost Omens line, covering so much new ground and making me interested in vastly new regions of Galarian that I maybe hadn't considered how interesting they could be. It was nice to see so many familiar countries, some of which I've had adventures in, some of which I've even done adventure paths in, and yeah, it was playing the hits, but it was also updating it, so it was familiar, and yet there were still new discoveries as well.
Great. That's exactly what we shot for, and I'm glad to hear that. And I hope that you'll join us for the final entry this year, the Draconic Codex. If you're into dragons at all, please check that book out.
I like a good dragon.
Well, there's plenty of good dragons, and plenty of bad dragons in there too.
Oh, the bad dragons are even better.
Yes, that's the fun ones.
All right, thanks so much, Luis.
Thank you.